Jesus gives us a timeline for end time events. But what does that have to do with us living in the United States of America? Or maybe if you're living in Australia or any country outside of Israel, like what does that have to do with us? Is this whole end time thing going to be a worldwide thing, or is it going to be more just Middle East thing? Join us today as Joel Richardson answers that question for us as we continue with our Are You Ready series. Okay, so number 21, and I want to talk. So I want to make this like, as we're human beings living on this earth, and this 7-year period is going to start. Okay, and then I want to talk about Matthew 24 because Jesus is the one who tells us exactly what's going to happen. So what I want to do is say, like, what should we when this 7-year period starts? What does Jesus say that is going? I want us to fill in the blanks for us. So we're like, okay, well, what exactly does that mean for me living in the United States? Because I don't know I think we asked this question, do we, about is this going to be a worldwide thing, or is this just, most people are stuck on the left behind. The whole world's going to come crashing down. The Bible doesn't say that. So what does this mean? Does this mean that we're all going to be affected by what, this first 3.5 years, because there's a lot of stuff that's going on, and I think we talk about that.
We definitely
we do. Okay, so let's just start with your first verse. But that's kind of where I want to go. I want us to know. Okay, in the first 3.5 years, what are we going to face?
Okay. Yeah. So let's just start with this. So Matthew 24, again, we mentioned it last night, called the Olivet Discourse. It's in the 3 Synoptic Gospels. So Matthew 24. Luke 21 and Mark 13. And they're all, just like the Synoptic Gospels, slightly different. Matthew 24 tends to be the passage that most people spend the most time looking at, but we could look at all 3. But again, this is Jesus' sermon on the last day. So he gives us kind of a big picture overview. So just to sort of jump back, Jesus is leaving the temple, and the disciples go, man, look at the temple, that thing's amazing. And Jesus throws them an incredible, shocking statement. He goes, I tell you the truth, not one stone will be left. That whole thing's like, imagine going to Washington, D.C., and you're walking around, the tour guide's like, here's the Washington Monument, and here's the Lincoln Memorial and the White House, and you're like, wow, that's amazing. And he goes, the whole thing is going to be a big smoking ash heap. You're like, wait, what did you just say? So the disciples are like, okay, let's just go back to what you just said about the whole temple's going to be destroyed. And they understood that the destruction of the temple was connected to the end time. So they go, tell us. They come to him privately on the Mount of Olives. That's why it's called the Olivet Discourse. The Mount of Olives looks across the Kidron Valley at the Temple Mount. And they go, tell us, when will these things be? What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Like, teach us about the end times, because it's confusing. And so he starts out, he goes, first of all, make sure that no one misleads you. Watch out for deception. So this is the first point. Make sure that no one misleads you. And then he kind of goes into laying these things out. So when he does this, when he starts laying out the Olivet Discourse, he draws from 2 key portions of Scripture. One is Isaiah 26 and 66, which we looked at last night. These are the passages in Isaiah that use the birth pain analogy. They say Israel will go through a time of great suffering that will lead to global redemption. So he draws from that language. Jesus reiterates, borrows from Isaiah, and reiterates and uses that language of birth pains and a birth. Okay, it's a wonderful analogy. And then he also draws from Daniel. Daniel is the one that gives us the 7-year time frame, in the middle of which is the abomination that causes desolation. That is the definitive time marker that any student of the end times needs to be aware of these basic things. So that's sort of the big framework that Jesus uses. We have a 7-year time frame, the middle of which is the abomination that causes desolation. And what Jesus does is he basically says the first half, these are the beginning of birth pains. The second half, those are the real birth pains. So in modern terminology, it's this: Braxton Hicks contractions. Don't go to the hospital just yet. but they are coming, right? Like for everyone that has their first baby, I think this is it. You go, sorry, these are just the beginning of birth. Like they don't quite count. They're like, but these already seem scary. And they're like, yes, but it's going to get much worse. So, but that's basically, so here's, just a very loose timeline to help us understand. This is the timeline that we want to pivot from. This is the timeline that Jesus gives us, again, not borrowing from, but expanding upon the words of the prophets. They all understand and are familiar with each other, and this is that which we want to pivot off of as well. So the first half is the beginning of birth pains. The second half is the great tribulation, or the birth pains, which lead to the birth being the return of Jesus, the renewal of all things, the end of all of this insanity, the end of this crazy, wicked, broken, corrupt system that we're living with, and the renewal, the birth of the age of redemption, so to speak. So that's a very biblical framework.
And we talked last night, too, the beginning of the 7 years starts with the Antichrist, who we may or may not know. We talked about that. We'll make a covenant with Israel, possibly a peace treaty, possibly something. This will be the start of it. If we're good students of the Bible, we probably will maybe sort of know that. He'll come on the scene as, I'm assuming, a nice guy at the beginning. We love love. We want to love Israel. We want to make peace. And then it's going to just kind of go bad from there. So, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so you can actually kind of work through it, all of the verses there in Matthew 24. Actually, real quick. So
yeah, let's go through those.
In verses 4 through 8, he goes, see to it that no one misleads you. Many will come in my name saying, I'm the Messiah. They'll mislead many. There's going to be false Christs, false Messiahs. You'll be hearing of wars, rumors of wars. So he kind of lays out the classic things that we think of with the last days. But don't be frightened. These things must take place. It's not yet the end. These are just the Braxton Hicks contractions. Nation will rise against nation. By the way, the word there in Greek is ethnos against ethnos. Ethnic groups against ethnic groups. We already see that, in the United States, so much racial tension. It's not just Canada is going to go to war with Mexico or whatever. It's not Russia and Ukraine. Well, it is that, but it's actually much more than that. It's racial tension, this type of thing. Kingdom against kingdom. Various places there'll be famines, earthquakes. Here it is. These are the beginning of birth pains. Don't be freaked out. These are the King James says the beginning of sorrows. These are the beginning of sorrows.
Now, can this happen like right now? Could we be like, oh, this is sort of kind of, or is this literally like the moment that contract is signed, now suddenly all of this is going to get worse? Or is it kind of more on a pathway to it?
I would say both. Like, you can say these things have been happening throughout all of human history, but there is a concentrated period. Once we shift into that final 7 year, again, as the Lord said through Daniel, 7 years, a Shavua has been set apart for your city and for your people. And then he goes on to seal up prophecy, to finish iniquity, to anoint them all. He lists these 6 things that will take place. So there is a set apart time which these things would be most concentrated. But in a sense, yeah, there's certainly, there's wars and rumors of wars now. But what happens in the prophecy community is people are always, some of the teachers, it's like they're chomping at the bit. They want to be like, we're already in the tribulation. You're like, no, don't jump the gun. We're not in the 7 years yet. Look, COVID was the first seal. There's just constant, this is that. And then, the YouTube videos galore about these things, and people freak out. Well, but COVID, the jab, because the first rider has a bow and arrow, and, and they get into these things. Oh, what's the thing? Oh, because the rider on the horse, the first seal, has a crown. Corona means crown. That must be the first seal. I'm like, no, that's not the first seal. But there's constantly people trying to make connections and say, we're not in it yet. I think, again, we'll know it. Most of us will know it if we're really studying the scriptures when we get there. That sort of answers that.
Here's my weird question, because someone asked me this at Bible study the other day. Should we be storing up food for stuff like this? As weird as that sounds, I was like, I don't even think about stuff like that. But, because there is going to, you've got famines. And, is that something that as Christians we should do, or should we just be like, yeah, whatever, we're good to go?
I think it's a personal decision.
Okay.
I think it's personal. Some people are really into that, some are not. Look, my wife and we just moved to a new house, and when we did so, we threw away, finally, our food that expired from Y2K. So we didn't buy a lot, but, we kind of bought I think it was $600 worth of canned stuff. The only thing we actually, we were like, well, surely we'll use this for cooking. Even if we don't use it for the end times, yeah, we'll use the powdered eggs. The only thing I think we ever used is the chocolate pudding, this big can.
That would be the first thing I would eat.
Yeah. You're looking around. You're down in the basement. What are you doing? Nothing. So, look, some people are really into storing, and look, if the Lord, here's my rule. I would say if the Lord tells you to do it, that's wonderful. So everyone stores up beans and bullets. The problem is, what do you do as a Christian when your neighbors come over and they're hungry because they didn't store up the beans? Do you use your bullets to protect your beans? Or do you share it with your neighbors? In which case, how can you ever have enough? So there's all these type of things. I think it's wise to be prepared. There could be natural disasters that could have nothing to do with the end times. It's wise to have these things. On the other hand, is there ever enough? Here's my rule personally in life when it comes to these things, when it comes to investing. I don't ever do anything out of fear. If I'm on the I was a painter for 20 some odd years. If I listening to Glenn Beck or some talk radio, and I'm like, oh gosh, I'm afraid. I need to do this and that. I would say never act out of fear, because it will lead you to make bad decisions. I remember, 20 years ago, I was like, and I took my life savings, which was not a lot, and I bought a bunch of silver, and immediately crashed. And, my wife's like, why are you such a moron? And I'm like, because I acted out of fear. So just don't do that. But again, if the Lord tells you with wisdom to prepare, maybe some people have a real calling to do that, to have a ranch where they want, to house people and families, and you have that type of calling, it's a personal decision is what I would say.
My brother started doing that. He moved to Arkansas and is canning and doing all. He's got this big warehouse. I'm like, perfect. I got food.
So wait, I know we have to be, so I have a good friend out here in the Phoenix area. I came out and visited with him some years ago, very wealthy guy. And he has I don't even know where he lives. He has a 16,000 foot house that he built with an additional 16,000 feet underneath. He has this big.
I hope he supports your ministry.
Well, I haven't talked to him in a while, but anyway, he was really into this. He had a digital shooting range in his basement. It was pretty cool. But anyway, so I got to tell this story because it's so funny. So he also had a cabin up in Show Low, and which had 2 bowling alleys in the basement. But he goes, yeah, I really want to buy a ranch for the end times. I was like, you got a mansion up in Show Low with 2 bowling alleys in the basement. You get a 16,000 foot house down here in Phoenix with an underground city under it. What do you need a ranch for? He goes, well, I don't want to go up to Show Low because the Apache reservation's nearby, and they'll come up. And I was like, what do you think this is the 1890s? I was like, they all have diabetes. They're not going to come riding through horses on the woods to raid for your food, to get your food. And then he goes, yeah, you're right. He goes, actually, I took my brother-in-law. We went to the reservation, and we said, who's the best Indian guide? Who's the best Apache hunting guide? And they said, this guy. So we go over to and he had a bunch of property, and we said, can you take us on a hunt? And the guy comes out, and half his foot had just been cut off. And so we hop in his station wagon, we go driving off into his property, and he goes, you boys mind if we just hunt from the car? And he goes, so we just stuck our guns out the window and drove around and shot. He's like, that was our authentic Indian hunt. Anyway, it's just a great Phoenix story. So I thought I would share that. Sorry for wasting time.
You're fine. You're going to be fine.
He's like, you're right. I probably should just be happy with what I have.
Okay, verse 9.
Okay, so then you get to the actual birth pains,
now,
verse 9 through 14.
Now, is this going to be after? Is this after? Are we still in the verse 3.5, or now are we moving into the after?
Yep. So here's the shift. So he says, then they will deliver you to tribulation. Okay, so again, that happens specifically when you see the abomination of desolation. Here's where he says it. They'll kill you. You'll be hated. At that time, many will fall away, betray one another. Many false prophets. Lawlessness is increased. As the brother pointed out, this is really, from a Hebrew perspective, it's a rejection of the ways, the instructions of God, a rejection of Torah. I'm not saying we all have to stop eating shrimp. That's not the point. But rejecting the spirit of God's instructions. That's where the world is now. They're hostile to the ways of the Lord. Because that lawlessness is increased, people's love will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end, the one who is raptured will be the one who endures to the end, the one that remains faithful through tribulation, through trials. They will be saved. This gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world as a testimony. Then the end will come. That's the actual birth pains. But here is, I'm sorry, I didn't quote it, but it's the abomination that causes desolation. Once that's established, that's where he says, when you see the abomination that causes desolation spoken of by Daniel, then know. But that's when the birth pains happen. So that's the second half. Then here's the birth, immediately after the tribulation. The sun will be darkened. These are the cosmic signs. The moon turns to blood. The stars will fall from heaven. The powers of heaven will be shaken. And then he gathers his elect. That's what we're looking for. We need to hold out for the birth.
Okay, hope that helped you today understand a little bit more about end times. I'm going to put our End Times Timeline Conference link below. And if you want to watch the whole series, it's like 6 hours long, but we're breaking these up in questions to make it easier so you can digest each question each week. If you want to know more about Joel, go joelstrumpet.com. That's what his website is. He's got lots of videos and books and things for you on there. So, all right, we'll see you next week.